Isaiah, how you doing, my brother?
Good, brother. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Other than the heat, everything's good. How is it over
Oh, yeah.
there in Alberta?
So we had a crazy heat wave too. We had like right around Canada Day, we had like 2 weeks that was like plus 40 every day and crazy hot. And it's really dry up here. Um, and now it's super, super rainy and shitty, so it's kind of the other side, right? But a little more tolerable.
That's all right. Yeah, we're not having like the best, or no, we're not having the most normal summer. Like it's never this hot, and the humidity is never as high. I guess
Right?
like to help me out here with like geography. Isn't Alberta supposed to be more colder though?
Yeah, Alberta is like our winters are notorious for like minus 40, 4 or 5 months of just hell.
So like when you're training and when you're doing all like when you're preparing for your camps and stuff, like obviously a lot of fighters like to run outside. So depending on the time of the year, that must suck if you have a fight preparing in the wintertime.
Yeah, that's a lot of treadmill work and a lot of indoor bike and all that. 'Cause really, it doesn't matter how mentally tough you are, like you physically just can't run in minus 30, right? Like I don't care if you're like Colby Cup and Nate Diaz level cardio, you love just can't do it, right? So from about October to depending on the year, kind of March, April range, yeah, you're not really able to do anything outside. So
Perfect, perfect. And if you had to prefer, what's your favorite time of the year? Winter, summer?
oh, summer by far, man. I have to get in trouble with my coaches for running outside too much. I like it that much, right? It's a nice little release and a nice way to keep everything, my weight down, my cardio up. So it kind of works all around.
Awesome, awesome. Now it being like really hot in the summer, I don't know what your type of drink is, but if you have a favorite, what do you like to drink on a hot summer day?
On a hot summer day,
Your
well,
choice.
considering my last 3 or 4 summers, I've all been in fight camp. It's been nothing but water and black coffee.
Hmm.
But if it's after a fight, if we're celebrating and it's a nice summer day, you can't go wrong with some nice cold beers like a couple Coronas or Bud Lights. That's a classic, tried and true, right?
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I just want to say thank you for coming on the podcast. I should said at the beginning. I appreciate you taking the time to come on here and let me interview you here. And yeah, I guess like just to start off here. So, I mean, this is pretty much your first pro fight's been this year, but like you've had amateur fights going back to 2015. So, is fighting something that you've always wanted to do, or?
Yeah, it's been kind of a gradual progression. I started out when I was about 12. I started watching wrestling, like WWE wrestling, and I got really into that. And that was what I originally wanted to do. So it's kind of an outlet for that. I started with judo, then that led to jiu-jitsu, which led to boxing. And it all just kind of snowballed, to where I took my first amateur fight, then I started fighting as an amateur regularly. And obviously I was amateur with intent to go pro, then I turned pro and now I'm all in on this journey of becoming a world champion. So it's been a cool gradual progression to see, right?
Well, I mean, looking at where you started in your career, that would have put you what, about 17, 18?
I had my first amateur fight about a month after I turned 19 because back then you couldn't amateur MMA was illegal in Alberta, and you couldn't fight in BC until you were 19. So as soon as I was able to, I got my first amateur fight in.
It's really unusual that they made it legal to actually have MMA in Alberta. I know the same was happening in Ontario for a while, and I think they flipped back and forth. Like, what was your thoughts going through that? I mean, how could they make that illegal? How could they make that illegal?
Well, I mean, it makes zero sense, right? So we can have pro fights, which are far more dangerous. Like you look at my first pro fight against Russell Cumber, I got that horrible cut, which blood was everywhere. It looked like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? Um, you don't maybe not quite to that level because even for a pro fight, that was a pretty bad cut. But you see cuts all the time in pro MMA, and you see injuries and knockouts. You sure as hell don't see cuts like that in amateur MMA. Even the knockout and injury ratio is lower. So really, it's safer. And to me, it never made sense how the safer side, the amateur fights are illegal, but we can have pro fights, no problem, right? That just never made sense to me.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there was a lot of fighters in my hometown who had that problem. Like they weren't totally ready for the pro scene. So to get the amateur fights, they had to fight outside of Ontario, which is on a little unfortunate. They had to travel. I know one guy I know had to travel to Montreal to fight. So it's a little unfortunate for guys that are just starting out or guys that just want to go pro. It can be a little bit of trouble for sure. And then throwing COVID on top of that for sure.
Oh yeah, no, and you see it now. I mean, within the last 10 years, we've seen the importance of amateur MMA, right? Because when MMA was first taken off, kind of after the tough boom, amateur MMA wasn't really a thing. Guys would maybe have an amateur fight or two, and then you went pro, and that's just how it was, right? Whereas now, myself, I had 10 amateur fights. I fought in national tournaments. I fought for belts. My training partner and one of my best friends, Alex Martinez, was a two-time silver medalist at the IMF World Championships down in Vegas. Another really good friend of mine, Jet Graham, was a gold medalist. They both have damn near 20 amateur fights, right? I mean, I myself have 10. So, gone are the days of guys just turning straight pro, rather right off the hop or after one or two amateur fights. And we're seeing guys recognize the importance now of, you know, getting your losses and cutting your teeth, making your mistakes as an amateur. So when you do go pro and you get that new record, you're ready to hit the ground running.
Saying so just to kind of add in what you were mentioning, looking at yourself, I mean, I think you would be glad that you started fighting in the last few years versus 10 years ago, and that's part of it. I think with the new generations of fighters, you're learning. I think the new generation of fighters are learning from the mistakes from the guys 10 years ago that had started, and learning to be well-rounded and learning that all of MMA, not just being specialized in one category than the other.
No, absolutely right. I mean, we're seeing guys now. You hear about Rory McDonald because he was one of kind of the first guys in Canada. They said he started out training mixed martial arts, right? He didn't start out, training just jiu-jitsu or just boxing. He went to David Lee to Shido. He started out training mixed martial arts. And we're seeing kids do that now. I mean, my gym has a youth MMA program. So, we have kids that are 12, 13, 14 that are already starting to learn those fundamental skills of being a well-rounded mixed martial artist. And that's super important. I myself, because that we were just kind of starting to see that, back in 2015 when I started fighting. I went in as just a grappler, just a jiu-jitsu kid, right? 19, didn't wrestle in high school, didn't have any amateur boxing fights. I was mainly just jiu-jitsu, and I picked those skills up of, wrestling and striking and everything else along the way. Or, you see a lot of guys who had a couple of amateur boxing fights, they start taking amateur fights. Whereas now we're seeing guys, the moment they're able to hit the mats, they're learning mixed martial arts. And the talent we're going to have in the next 10, 15 years is going to be scary for sure.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And right away, I mean, any organization you see, the weight classes in all the divisions in any organization you see is just becoming so thick. It's unbelievable to see so much talent and different unique styles coming out. And I think that's the beauty of the sport. And I think that just makes the sport grow more and more. I think every sport starts off somewhere.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing each nation get its own style. With the emergence of, well, Habib before he retired, and now Islam, and AKA's pumping out all these Dagestan, and when you fight somebody from Dagestan, they're gonna have that take you down and maul you style, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you fight an American, more than likely they're gonna have an amateur wrestling or an amateur boxing background, right? We're kind of seeing it really become a worldwide sport. It's cool to see each nation kind of get its own style and have that style represented, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and those Dagestan guys, I mean, And I know we kind of just talked about, you know, you learning all of MMA, but a lot of those Dagestans guys, I mean, they're just fortunate enough they're so good at what they do, and I mean, but eventually that's not always gonna be enough. I mean, I think Khabib, if he had fought longer and longer, eventually he's going to run into a guy that's going to give him that problem where you're not going to be able to take me down, and I can go 5 rounds just like that. Um, and that's the beauty of MMA. I mean, there's always someone that's going to be better, and there's always going to be someone better that's going to be able to beat your style. So that's, you know, going back to saying MMA, that's why it's good for these kids that are starting younger and younger and younger, learning all around MMA versus just one style than the other.
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? Um, you look at somebody like Khabib, you know, and Khabib was one of my all-time favorite fighters. Somebody I really model a lot of my game after. You know, would it have been Tony Ferguson? Would he have been able to catch him? You know, now it's with Charles Oliveira, with his jiu-jitsu, been able to, you know, either caught him, you know, shooting on a takedown or off his back. And I think you hit the nail on the head that there's always going to be somebody better. But with these kids now, and you know, as soon as they're able to walk on the mats and start training, and they're learning to be a well-rounded mixed martial artist, it's only going to be the absolute elite of the elite in the, you know, not just the UFC, but PFL, Bellator, ONE FC, the big four. It's only going to be the highest level of the highest level. So I think as fans, we're in for a treat over the next couple of decades of watching fights.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to kind of move on here, though. So, you know, looking at last year, COVID was the big discussion. We're starting to really get out of that now. But looking back at 2020, I mean, you had a fight booked in March. COVID comes around. What's your thought process going into that fight being canceled?
Yeah, so that was a weird one. Because I had my last amateur fight. That was in 2019. So I had my last amateur fight in June. Um, that August, talked to my coaches, decided, you know what, let's take the training wheels off. Like I'm ready to go pro. You know, I've shown I can do this, and I'm ready to, you know, turn professional. I'm all in. I'm ready to make a run at this, you know, as not only being a full-time professional but a world champion, right? So turned professional. Was supposed to have my first pro fight in October. That fell through with a couple different opponents. Same with December. Same with March. So finally, March 13th, got a read on. After the day, a different fight got canceled. That fight got signed because somebody else got injured on the unified card. So the perfect timing. I slotted in. Everything's good. And that was the fifth opponent I had for my pro debut. So at that point, I was more than ready. Um, and then I remember that week starting to hear like, hey, we might get shut down. You know, things are looking a little weird, but you've got so much more in your mind and you don't want anything to mess with that. I tuned it out. You know what it is, what it is. We'll deal with it after. Um, and then it was the day before weigh-in. It was all packed, ready to leave. I was sitting here in my office, actually exactly where we're in right now, and Nick Haravic, a buddy of mine who's at Everton, who's on the card as well. He was on the unified card the day before me, but he was on this one as well. He messaged me a link saying, you know, the government's shutting everything down. You know, I don't think we're fighting. But then I heard, you know, no, we're still going to go ahead because it was booked previous. So there was an hour of, you know, calling my coaches, calling promoters, fighters, trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And then about an hour later, Stunning Serene, who runs Unified, messaged me and said, you know, unfortunately, just we can't go ahead. Government's shutting us down, and that was heartbreaking, man. That was a real low point to be that close to finally making my pro debut, and then it gets shut down for something that we've never ever seen before like this. So it was a strange time for sure.
Yeah, and I think like for a guy like yourself, do you feel like was there that fear? I mean, looking at yourself, you know, obviously UFC, they were able to over the couple months after when they started shutting things down, they were able to put the shows still back on. But for yourself, a guy really starting out with your pro debut, did you have any fear like, oh shit, like I'm not gonna be able to fight? What was the thoughts going through your mind?
I knew I would fight again at some point, and whether it was determination or I was just crazy enough, you know, I knew I started looking at fighting down in the States. I started looking at fighting down in everywhere, right? Like by any means, I was going to make my pro debut and get the wheels rolling. And I knew I'd fight again in Canada. I just didn't know when, right? So it was kind of being stuck in purgatory because I'm staying ready, I'm keeping my weight low, I'm still training full time, but there's not that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Like when you finish a fight camp and you get to go fight, right? So it was a year of just staying ready, putting in the time, and waiting to finally have the green light to go ahead and do it.
Of course. Now, talking about your pro debut, obviously didn't go the way you want to. Granted, it was doctor stoppage. That's not always dictating how a fight goes, but obviously, it was doctor stoppage. But are you kind of glad that you kind of got your first pro debut or your first pro fight or your first pro loss out of the way, and now you can kind of just move forward?
You know, yes and no, right? I mean, obviously nobody ever wants to lose. Um, and especially after waiting that long to make my pro debut and then, starting with a loss, like you said, granted it was a doctor stoppage, but I'm not Sean O'Malley. I'm not going to come on here and claim I'm mentally undefeated or defeated or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, my hand wasn't raised and I lost.
Mm-hmm.
But I took so much from that loss, and the circumstances around it that I think, even now, 6, 7, 8 fights down the road, when I'm on a really big win streak, and whether it's contender series or I'm outright in the UFC, whatever, I'm going to look back on that as a real big turning point. So short term, 100% it sucked. I was heartbroken. But long term, I'm going to take more from that than I lost. So it's 50-50, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, then again, I mean, looking in the next fight, you come out victorious. It's your first pro stoppage, your first pro win. How did obviously under the Canadian restrictions, what did you get to do to celebrate?
Not much, honestly. Vancouver was a lot more locked down than we were because Alberta had already announced they were coming out of restrictions, and all that. So they already kind of started to loosen up the restrictions a little bit. But we fought in the afternoon, which is strange because usually you're not fighting until at least 7 if you're the first fight of the night, and usually with the way fight cards are ran, it was amateur. So if you're a pro, you're not fighting till 8:39.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas I fought at like 5 in the afternoon, right? So because it was during the restrictions too, you couldn't stay and watch the event. So, you had to arrive at a set time, you warmed up, you fought, and then within 10, 15 minutes, I was headed back to the hotel out of the venue after I saw the doctor. Um, so I went back to the hotel, called a bunch of people, FaceTimed my coach who gave me my first belt over FaceTime. So that was awesome. Then we went down to the Shark Club in the hotel, had a couple of drinks, and that's about it. We couldn't really do anything too fun or exciting, but thankfully I got to come back home that next day, and that following weekend I went out with a bunch of friends, celebrated, watched the Adesanya and Vittori card, and it was awesome. So at least I got to finally, after waiting and waiting and waiting, I finally got to have that moment of going out and celebrating my first pro win. So it was worth the wait for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, you just said that you just watched the UFC card, so you tend to do like to watch some of the other fights that do go on TV.
Oh man, I watch. I don't think there's a fight on planet Earth I haven't seen. I watch everything, so for sure.
And talking about your next opponent, and I'm gonna try my best to say I had to write it down just to pronounce it as a Dean Alamia. So at least on paper, you have a lot more experience, just in your amateur career. So do you feel, and this is kind of a two-part question, so do you feel like the experience is going to play a role in this fight? And what can you give me a good prediction for this fight?
Yeah, so Izzadine at me. I actually fought his brother Alvaro at me back in 2018 for an amateur belt. My coach ended up stopping it just because of all the damage I was taking. And now, years later, I am fighting his younger brother, a weight class below, because that fight was at 145 and this is at 35, and we're both pros now. So it's kind of crazy how it's all come full circle, right? Definitely the experience will play a factor. I mean, amateur and pro combined. This is my 13th fight. This is only his third. But by the same token, he's been doing martial arts since he was 10 years old. He's got a lot of kickboxing fights, a lot of jiu-jitsu matches. So he's legit, man. He's a legit martial artist, and a win over a legit martial artist like him, whether he's only had 2 fights or 200 fights, is going to be a big win on my resume. When I go out there and I finish him, whether it's by TKO, whether it's by submission, by any means, I want to get the finish, keep my finish ratio at 100%, and show that I'm the future of bantamweight in Canada.
Excellent. Excellent. Good to hear. Just a few more for you. So as far as I'm concerned, you're 23, 24?
I turned 25 weeks of my fight, actually.
25. Okay. And I mean, looking at yourself at this point in your life, I can't imagine that you have any family yet, correct?
No, God.
So looking at yourself, you're still quite young in this sport. When you're not training, when you're not fighting, what do you like to do on your own time?
When I'm not training, that seems to be a rare occasion, honestly, man. It's funny, we were talking about this last night. A lot of guys, the battle is getting them in the gym and you need to train more. Whereas I get trouble from my coaches for not taking enough rest and like, hey, you don't need to train 3 times a day, right? But when I'm not training, man, I'm huge into sports. I'm a huge hockey fan, football fan, rap, something I'm really passionate about. Started gaming again, right? I've started to find little things to fill my time with, so I'm not just running my body totally to the ground, right? If I've already trained 6 days a week, 2 to 3 times a day, I don't need to get in the third training session on Saturday, right? So I've been really working on, whether it's playing a game or watching a movie or whatever, I've been working on finding things, especially during training camp, because your mind is so locked in and focused. You're always, should I be training? Should I be doing this? So I've been trying to find little things to fill those gaps, and it's helped for sure.
And I mean, like I'm sure you have your management, you have your coaches to help you out through those decisions.
Oh, 100%, man. I go to my head coach, Bill Mahood, my striking coach, Randy Mahan. I've got my Muay Thai coach, Ray Patino, my Taekwondo coach, Luis Martinez, my wrestling coach, Adam Langford. I'm pretty blessed in that I have almost my own team in a sense, right? I've got 5 different coaches, which is pretty rare, especially at this level. So yeah, anything I'm going to do, whether it's obviously fighting related, but even life related, I lean on them for advice and mentorship. So it helps for sure.
And I mean, and just one more for you. In the next 5 years, where do you see yourself?
UFC fighting for a belt.
Excellent. I love the confidence. Do you feel like the contender series is an option? Do you feel like you're just going to get signed right away? Where do you see yourself in that situation?
You don't, not even just Canadian MMA, but right now in general, you don't see a lot of guys getting signed outright, unless it's somebody like Mike Chandler, who's a big name free agent. He was a world champion, Bellator, even casual who he was. A lot of guys, unless it's something short notice like the Tristan Conley situation, or my buddy Kyle Prepelek, same thing with him. Unless it's something like that where it's like a week's notice, they need somebody in the area. 95% of guys are getting onto the contender series, and we're seeing more and more Canadians like Aaron Jeffries, Chad Hellinger, my friend TJ Laramie,
Even Jasmine,
yeah, her exactly, right. So even just in Canadian MMA, we're seeing a lot of guys go on the contender series and get in that way. So that's the goal right now is contender series.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, man. I appreciate it. Good luck with your fight, and bring back a win.
Awesome. Thank you, my man. Will do. Thank you for having me.